Who was Charlie Kirk? I've always described Charlie Kirk as one of the top 10 most influential conservatives in the country. And people might think that was overblowing the case, but I'm not sure it was. His organization, TPUSA, was on college campuses everywhere. He had a commanding effect over young college-age people, especially young men. That whole manosphere, the Men Too election. We can talk about like the various podcasts that people went on. We can talk about Theo Vaughn and all that stuff. Charlie Kirk was at the very forefront of that. He was in all that stuff. He eventually basically became the ground game of Trump's 2024 reelection campaign. He also, though, and this is the most important part for our show, just because of what we cover, he became a thoroughgoing Christian figure and, dare I say, Christian nationalist figure. Charlie Kirk did not start out as a kind of explicitly Christian person. In fact, in 2018, according to a profile by Mara Richards at Baptist News Global, he told Dave Rubin that separation of church and state should be respected and all these kinds of things. But from the pandemic forward, Kirk became a much more outgoing and explicit Christian figure. He talked about his faith all the time. He was discipled by Rob McCoy at Godspeak in Ventura and also Jack Hibbs in Southern California. And these were the pastors, and they are both vehemently Christian nationalist pastors who've been involved in the school board fights and the curriculum fights and the book ban fights. He eventually said in 2022, there is no separation of church and state. It's a fabrication. It's a fiction. It's not in the Constitution. In 2021, TPUSA redefined its mission, and this was just after J6. And instead of being focused on fiscal responsibility and free markets, it became invested in guiding citizens through development of knowledge, skills, values, and motivation so they can engage in their communities and restore traditional American values like liberty and family. Dan, if you read between the lines there, that is, hey, we're not libertarian anymore. We're traditionalist Christian.
It becomes the Heritage Foundation, right? It's the Heritage Foundation for young men, and very effective.
That is exactly. That's the best way to put it. And he also, and I'll stop here. He also became incredibly embedded with the New Apostolic Reformation. I covered this. I talked about it extensively on this show, but it was the New Apostolic Reformation plus Charlie Kirk as a kind of ground game for Trump. There was also TPUSA Faith, and this was a wing of his organization that invited pastors to conferences, and they would pay for them. And there was just a systematic approach to getting MAGA Christian nationalism into churches. And they did this very, very effectively. The end of the fiscal year in 2023, more than $13 million TPUSA Faith claimed as expenses as they coordinated with 2,400 churches and 6,000 pastors. So Dan, Charlie Kirk is a guy that was influencing, dare I say, millions of college students, 6,000 pastors, 2,400 churches in 1 year. How many people does that translate into in terms of if you add up all the podcasting, the conference appearances, the radio, etc.? This is one of the most influential conservatives in the nation.
The only other thing I want to add, I mean, you're talking about really the ground game on one hand, right, and the infrastructure that he built, the move toward Christian nationalism that was becoming increasingly popular, and some people will debate, did he really believe it? I don't care. Like he identified that way, used the language, all of that. But I think the other piece of it is just recognize he was a very, very effective speaker. And
Yes.
and I agreed with, I don't know if there's anything that Charlie Kirk probably ever said that I agreed with. But from just you analyze the way that he would debate, the way that he would speak, the way that he would bait people into responses and so forth, very, very effective communicator. Very effective communicator. In a digital age that's into sound bites and short quips, he was very good at the one sentence answer. The feeling of assurance that he would have, we've talked about this before, when he would give a quick response, set down the mic, and stand back. All of that, all of those things that I think debate coaches or speech coaches or others would look at, that was tied in with this as well. So a very, very effective motivational speaker And I think it's one of the reasons why now, as we're talking about, you start getting the mainstream media sort of talking about him in particular ways and so forth, is because he was a very, very good speaker in terms of like just the actual effect it would have on his audiences and listeners.
We'll come back to this too. The way he debated was not debate, if you ask me.
Yes.
It was debate. It was cloaked as debate,
Yes.
but it was really a matter of
But
conquest,
very
and we can come
effectively
back to that.
cloaked. That's the key.
Yep.
That's the
Oh,
key.
yes.
Yep.
And I have spent an inordinate amount of time on TikTok this week, and all of the right-wing talking points and people responding to this have said, he was just the guy that showed up and wanted to debate you. It was an open debate, bro. What's the big deal? Like that was always the line. He did advocate ending separation of church and state, which I mentioned a bit ago. He did mobilize Republican candidates, and he did participate with Lance Wallnau in various endeavors, and that includes spiritual warfare. Lance Wallnau is one of the country's leading spiritual warfare activists, and both of them were pretty key in getting people mobilized to January 6th. Charlie Kirk said that God's perfect law says that gay people should be stoned to death. And so that was kind of part of what he liked to talk about. He said that somebody should break Paul Pelosi's attacker out of jail, because if they did so, they would be a patriot. He said that Black women like Michelle Obama and Ketanji Brown Jackson, they got to where they were because they were affirmative action hires. They did not have the brain power to get to where they should be or wanted to be on their own. And so that's how they got to their positions of power and elevation. He said that Martin Luther King Jr. was a bad guy. And you're free to say that, but it is something that he said. I've talked about that extensively in my writing and on this show. So that's just part of what he said. He consistently said that trans people are mentally ill, and, there should be really no recognition of their identity. I could go on and on and on about the ways that he talked about people. I have more to say here. Do you want to add anything on this front, or?
No, just to tie together some points that I think you've made and that you're making here. The number of people who weren't familiar with Kirk, together with what they're hearing now is, oh, he just wanted to have open debate. He was a debater. He just wanted to talk. He just wanted to discuss. He was a free speech advocate, all that sort of stuff. Until you look at the content of what he said, which is part of, it's part of the story of Charlie Kirk. Let's say he wanted to debate and so forth. It's fine. His views were reprehensible in my view, right? To be clear, that doesn't mean that I think it's right for somebody to have shot him. But his views were and they were intentionally provocative. That's the other piece of this. We talk about the effective communication that he had. Part of that was cloaking a very, increasingly right-wing ideology and culture war stuff, whatever, as debate, as discussion, and so forth. But the other one was provoking responses, provoking anger in his opponents. He wanted people who disagree with him to lose their cool, and he wanted them to verbally attack him or to lash out in debate, whatever. He wanted to sort of break their cool and composure so that he could say, see, we on the right, we're the reasonable ones. We're the ones having the discussion. You're the ones who are angry all the time or crazy or whatever. And that was another piece of this. So often these positions were stated in very provocative ways, things that were very provocative and stated just matter-of-factly, as if it's just a matter of fact and just a matter of observation and so forth, to provoke those responses so that he and those who support him could say, see, we told you, you're the ones who are really mean or angry or whatever.
Of other things he said over the years, he said that we need to have Nuremberg-style trial for every gender-affirming clinic doctor, and we need it immediately. He said that it's happening all the time in urban America. Prowling blacks go around for fun to target white people. If you're a WNBA pot-smoking black lesbian, do you get treated better than a United States Marine? If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. If I'm dealing with someone in customer service who's a moronic black woman, I wonder, is she there because of her excellence, or is she there because of affirmative action? I could go on and on. This stuff is everywhere. The reason we bring this up, and Dan, I think you just said this, but I think the reason we bring this up is to say there's no reason that somebody should have murdered Charlie Kirk. We are not advocating for that in any way. But what we are noticing, at least what I've noticed, Dan, is that what's happening in the mainstream media is that people who don't know who Charlie Kirk was, at least for what he stood for, are now valorizing him as kind of a proponent of free speech, a proponent of open debate, and a hero to the right, in the kind of vein of Ronald Reagan or something. Not that Ronald Reagan didn't have things that he said that weren't truly offensive. There's this kind of movement now to make Charlie Kirk center, I think. And there's really no way to do that if you examine what he was saying. This is not John McCain, Mitt Romney. And I'll just mention one more thing that I think we have to get in here, which is that TPUSA had a professor watch list. And what they would do is if you got on the professor watch list, this started after Trump was elected the first time. They would basically send your information out to their people and say, oh, here's our professor watch list. We think this person is someone who's teaching things that are woke, communist, socialist, gender, sex, whatever. Stacey Patton saying this. His so-called professor watch list, run under the umbrella of Turning Point USA, is a digital hit list for academics who dare to speak truth to power. I landed there in 2024 after writing commentary that inflamed the MAGA faithful, and once my name went up, the harassment machine roared to life. For weeks, my inbox and voicemail were deluged. Mostly white men spat venom through the phone calling me words that I'm not going to say here, including the N-word and the C-U-N-T word. They overwhelmed the university's PR lines and the president's office with calls demanding that I be fired. The flood was so relentless that the head of campus security reached out to offer me an escort because they feared one of these keyboard soldiers might step out of his basement and come do me harm. So that is part of what TPUSA did. And there's testimony after testimony of this. Kevin Kruse, the Princeton historian, talked about this on social media this week, and so on and so forth. So that's all there. And yet what we're seeing, Dan, in the media this week is him being valorized as a kind of American conservative hero that didn't have this kind of, what I would call at least, denigrating rhetoric about so many people who live in the United States. He also said that it's worth having Second Amendment rights and guns in our country, even if that means a few gun deaths per year. He said it's rational that we should believe that if you want your Second Amendment rights, that you have to accept that people will just be killed by guns in the country. And we see that every day when it comes to schools and children and so on.
I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational. Nobody talks like this. They live in a complete alternate universe.
His casket was put on Air Force Two by Vice President J.D. Vance. Pete Hegseth, the Department of Defense head, the Secretary of Defense, said a military prayer for him with troops. Trump ordered flags to be flown at half-mast. And this is happening at government buildings. It's also happening at like your local McDonald's. Governor Shapiro, a Democrat in Pennsylvania, ordered the same thing to be done. Gavin Newsom said that we need to, quote, carry on the work of Charlie Kirk. The Yankees and Red Sox had a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk. The NFL did too. And then the worst one, and the one I want to talk about at more length, is CBS invited Jack Posobiec to be on and talk about Charlie Kirk, his friend,